that ceremony at the beginning of today, I actually thought about, this is totally off script, by the way. I actually thought about my hometown of Jayuya. We have this festival called El Festival Indígena. And yeah! So somebody here knows what I'm talking about, right? And it's truly amazing, right? So we have a lot of indigenous dancing and so on. So the ceremony this morning was super important to me because it transported me back to my roots, right? And so I'm gonna get my clicker here. And I wanted to talk to you about just some tips of my career today and things that I have gathered over the years, you know. You can call it nuggets of wisdom, or you can just say like, yeah, that's Marvin, you know, talking at happy hour too. And so here's my career. If you are from Puerto Rico, how many people are from Puerto Rico here? Okay, I'm between my familia, right? Perfect. So if you see my career and you try to make sense of it, trying to make sense of my career is like going to my hometown of Jayuya from San Juan, okay? So it's a very curvy and turbulent road, okay? So prepare for it. I'm gonna try to cover this in like 5 minutes. This has costed me many years. And so after the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez, where I learned that through actually conferences like this and also summer research experiences are used, those are research experience for undergrads, actually, that are funded by NSF, you should know. Now that I'm at the National Science Board, I see how everything is connected, right? So I decided to go to study a PhD, and quite frankly, I just felt like after my bachelor's, I didn't know enough, and I wanted to continue, and I love research and innovation. And I also learned that if you go, it's actually paid for. So I could actually do a PhD, and I didn't have to go in depth. So I did that at the university, at Carnegie Mellon University, studied actually materials and transport inside of materials used for biosensors. For my postdoc, I decided to move on, and rather than going into an industrial position or an academic position, I went and did a postdoc and studied neural stem cells, and basically their differentiation and their proliferation inside or encapsulated in gels in vitro analysis. And I designed all of my experiments, and you can see how all of this is highly related to aerospace, right? So at the University of Washington, I actually started working after my wife was hired there a year later. And I want to tell you about that year because that year was actually really important in my life and also transformational in ways that I understand today and I couldn't understand at that point. In 2007, I moved to Washington, so just nearby. Where my wife was recruited at the University of Washington as a professor, and I went to Seattle thinking, well, how hard could it be to find a job, right? And so, I went with my bachelor's, PhD, fancy postdoc, and 2 children. At that point, we already had our 2 daughters. One was Sophia, was 2.5 years old at the time, and Elena was 2 months old. And still, I wanted to get a job. So I actually started to find, to look for roles, and I couldn't find anything. And it was, I don't know if you know about the autumn, and fall basically in Seattle, but it's not the sunniest place on earth. And trying to find a job and trying to find daycare at the same time for my 2 daughters was extremely hard. In fact, that year, if you guys remember, was the year where the economy collapsed too. So not an easy thing. But yet I continued looking. The university actually eventually hired me as a lecturer. So I started teaching, and it was quite funny, frankly, because they asked me, okay, so somebody left the department. Could you ask Marvi if she can teach? And I say, absolutely, right? I had not taught a class before, okay? So, but I was so desperate to actually start working And in 2008, I started at the University of Washington, and here's where it's gonna go really fast, okay? In 2008, I started teaching the chemical engineering lab and thermodynamics. In 2009, I started working on the side as a consultant on intellectual property and for basically companies in Washington. In 2010, I moved to the bioengineering department to work on a project in which we combine plasma desorption of molecules, principal component analysis, which is a mathematical tool, and then mass spectroscopy. And that same year, I learned that Boeing opened positions through a personal contact, and I applied. And they were looking for someone that understood plasmas, so I applied to basically start formulating materials with plasma-enhanced deposition. And these were films that were used for abrasion-resistant and erosion-resistant materials in aircraft. In 2012, that was in 2010 at the end, I started at Boeing. In 2012, I became a manager in a manufacturing plant. We actually produced 4,000 to 5,000 parts per day, and I was leading the process engineering and manufacturing engineering technicians too. In 2014, we moved to Australia on a special assignment. And then in 2015, I became director of chemical technologies, metals, and ceramics. That interview was a surprise to me, quite frankly. But when they interviewed me, I said, well, if they're going to interview me, I'm going to make it very hard for them not to pick me, right? So I overly prepared, build a strategy, basically what how I see and what was my vision for that particular organization. In 2017, I moved to Blue Origin, so I left Boeing and moved to Blue Origin to establish the materials and processes team. And in 2019, I became crew capsule director for the vehicle called New Shepard. And at that time, we were actually doing a verification for first human flight. In 2020, I went back to Boeing and actually led design practices. And there's a story there behind those transitions. If you want to know, catch me at happy hour later. And so in 2023, this year, at the beginning of this year, after basically almost 3 years of leading design practices for the company, I actually started leading the P8 team, the air vehicle team for the P8 program at Boeing. And this year, we reorganized within our division. And I became the director for systems engineering, integration, and test for the division of mobility surveillance and bombers. That's my career. Okay. Thank you. So here's my, sort of nuggets of wisdom very fast, right? So first, one of the things that I have learned to appreciate is that you have to start from reflecting from within. What does that mean? First, you got to think about your vision. And when I say your vision, people talk about plans. Fabio and I were actually talking about how students, should be formulating their plans and their tasks, and those are very useful. But it might be a little bit more profound to think about your legacy. What do you want your legacy to be? What do you want your mission to be? So why did I become right? Why did I become an engineer? Why did I become a scientist? Why did I become a mathematician? What are my set of unbreakable values? And this set of unbreakable values actually have driven me from one thing to another when I see that I'm not a good fit not because I don't belong, but because the system around me does not necessarily reflect the values and the set of values that were in me, ingrained in me since my childhood in Jayuya, Puerto Rico. And so when you think about yourself is what are your values, what is that set of unbreakable values, and then finally, with your mind and body, what is the meaning to you of a fulfilling life? What does that mean? and what is the definition of life-work balance. Those two last things are really important because when things get really not great, right? When things get like blurry and you're in jobs where you don't necessarily feel comfortable, you gotta go back to these four things, like your vision, your mission, your values, and then what does it mean to you to have a fulfilling and a balanced life. The second point is adapting as you go. So each transition, and I've done many transitions both personally and professionally, and those of you that know me personally know what I'm talking about, right? So those transitions require careful management. So when you're, but this also applies at work, okay? So when you're leading projects and when you're leading teams, and you're basically transition from one project to another, or you're driving your team, there are resources out there that you can use. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So something that I have done over the years is to really use a lot of what people call self-help books. And those are actually really useful. Later on, I discovered that those are actually leadership books, not just self-help, right? And so some of those examples are here. If you want to take notes, Drive, the book called Drive from Daniel Pink is very good. First, Break All the Rules. I mean, just by the title, you kind of have to love the book, right? And then X Teams is actually a technique developed by an MIT professor, which is very useful to focus the teams on what is expected by your customers. And then organization processes, so learning about organization processes in general really help you to adapt as you go, not just as an individual, but also for your teams. Leading at any level requires you to be a servant leader. This is my personal philosophy. I don't believe that there should be managers if there are no people to lead, right? So therefore, if you have people to lead, then you are there to serve your people. The way I think about it, I believe that I'm the pilot. Of course, I'm in a plane, right? So I'm the pilot, and then the rock stars are actually the people that I'm driving to their concert, right? And the rock stars are my engineers. So they are absolutely fabulous. The people that I had the opportunity to work with are absolutely geniuses, right? So I feel very blessed, therefore I am their servant. And a good book for that one is The Leader's Way. Actually, it's from the Dalai Lama and a business consultant that I don't remember the name of. And then finally, in leading change and adapting as you go, one book that I recommend is Managing Transitions. It's very good once you become a manager and a leader in any field. It could be in industry or it could be in academia. And I have to say, if there is something that you would like to master, is change, like managing change. Once you have the ability to manage it within yourself, and when you say change, the change could be a switch, right? But the transition is actually a process. When you teach people how to go through that process, you're not only helping them as individuals, but in the collective, you're actually driving them to a better world, like to the greater good, right? So it is a superpower to really be able to lead people through change. The third point is cultivate a growth mindset. And a growth mindset, there's actually a book called Mindset, which this is based on. So it's this idea that intelligence can be developed and your abilities can be enhanced through a learning process. And so it sounds pretty obvious, right? But actually many of us, when you are going back into what's stopping you to do something, it's because we have these inherent beliefs that we can't do it because we're not good at it, right? I don't know if I should learn how to dance because I've never really danced and I'm not good at dancing, right? And actually you can get much better with a lot of practice. Believe me, it's possible, right? And that is true for everything. That's true for leadership. That's true for many of the skills that we can develop along our careers, right? Develop those skills as you go, and as as you learn, then you actually your mind becomes more plastic. And those of you neuroscientists in the room, I'm thinking of Monica here, right? Like, you actually understand this. Like, there's brain plasticity. You can actually learn as you go. So my transitions from functional to programs, and these notes here might not make much sense to you, but in my head, there's actually a thread. So from functional to programs, meaning from functional alignment in companies to product-based, facing groups, that takes a lot of energy, but that also takes a lot of learning. And so the way I learn through, from one point to the next is by creating transition plans. I create 30, 60, 90 very detailed transition plans for myself. Nobody asked me for this. And then I share that with my teams. And these become tools that are really useful for you to not just tell people what you're doing, right? But also to guide yourself in the learning process. As a leader, you can also focus on building a strategy for competitive advantage. These things you have to learn along the way. In where you are today, you might be an undergrad student, a graduate student. Where you are today, you're not thinking about this just yet, perhaps. Maybe you do. Maybe you're thinking about a product you want to market, right? But the fact is that as you go, you will develop these skills, and developing strategies for competitive advantage for your products and for your teams is important. And then the third one here, which actually is very ingrained in learning too, is a focus on service. At least for me, it's linked. Now, treating life as a learning journey is super important. Adapting, learning new skills, and meeting new challenges, right? Once you're in your comfort zone, once you're, feeling like, this is easy, this is like I can do the same thing every day, you probably need to move on. So the fourth point here is live with gratitude every day. And believe me, not every day will you feel grateful, right? Because sometimes things happen. We just went through a pandemic. Feeling grateful every day felt hard for those of us who, the pandemic touched close. And the whole thing here, actually, this has two sides. One of it is la gratitud is a virtue, is one of those values, actually, that are ingrained to us by our parents and by los abuelos and los tatarabuelos y los bisabuelos y so on, right? So it is actually a very Hispanic value, I believe. We are very grateful people. So there's the cultural aspect of gratitude, but then there's also the neuroscientist aspect of gratitude. Being grateful is linked to actually having like a better alignment with your goal and pursuing those goals and actually meeting your goals. A precursor, and this is kind of like a side note, a precursor for gratitude to me is purpose, right? So when I think about my vision and mission and if I am doing what I want to do every day, right, is my vision and mission linked there, right? So do I feel a sense of purpose? Because when I feel a sense of purpose, then I am grateful, right? And so it helps me to really build gratitude every day in my life. And so this alignment, right, to or as a mission, alignment to a mission and a sense of purpose. And then finally, this is full circle in the presentation, a mind and body balance. And so what I mean by that is, actually, it goes to the simplest things that you can do as a human being, okay? So what are the basics? And I know that you're all very pressured in your jobs and in your roles and in school and tests. And believe me, I just went through I went back to school as I was working, and the last thing I wanted to do was to take a final test, okay? But the mind and body working together are important. So that balance works in very basic ways. So eating well, sleeping well, drinking enough water, exercising, having a good network, right, of friends and family members who care for you and who are there for you when you need them. All of those basic things in life are really important, and they will propel you to be the best version of yourself. And after you think about all of these things, and after you do all of this, I want you to know and tell you every day, and this is what I tell to, I guess, to all of us that need to hear this sometimes, is you are enough, and you're more than enough. That's it. Thank you.